And so the family that kind of skipped over that line because they're like, you're descended from a woman, so apparently you don't count.
Hi, I'm Reba Hervis, Artistic Director at Overshadow Theatrical Productions. Welcome to this week's episode From the Wings. I have two very special guests with me today. So first, Katie, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I am Katie, and I have been working with Reba for 17 years.
Yeah, probably.
Something like that.
My name is Angelo, and I am new to Overshadowed. I was just in Willy Wonka, and on the side, I like to write a little bit and do improv.
One of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about today is unlocking the mystery of Shakespeare. When Angelo recently went to see Richard III that is playing right now at Chicago Shakespeare, I thought, oh, we have got to talk about this with Katie, because she is probably my resident Shakespeare expert. Sure. But before we start talking about Richard III, let's talk about what you know about Shakespeare and how just that experience, what that meant to you.
Wow. How much time do we have? So I was in 9th grade, and so I had never read Shakespeare before or heard it. And I remember that day in class, like all the lights were turned out. He brought candles in, and there was mood music, and he read the witches part, and it was like, ooh, this is really interesting. And you totally understood, because he read it in the Shakespearean language, and I was like, oh, this is understandable.
Yeah, so I was sort of in a similar experience where in school we read Shakespeare, and we did Romeo and Juliet, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of boring.
Wow, both of you!
Yeah.
Such a teenager.
Wait, but how can you as teenagers?
I think it's just that the story is so known that you go into it already knowing what's going to happen, and it doesn't. There's no surprise, I guess.
Yeah.
My senior year, we read Hamlet, and that was, I think, just an immersive experience. And then we watched the Kenneth Branagh film, which was so good. I mean, and I think similar to what you were saying, the way that they were able to communicate and read the lines and the setting and just everything about the movie was such an amazing experience to see something that felt out of touch suddenly like be able to sink in. So that's when I was like, okay, there's something here. There's something to enjoy about Shakespeare.
Angelo saw a trailer on Facebook?
Instagram.
And why don't you go from there?
So I didn't know anything about Richard III, but I was kind of like, I wanted to see something. So I was just checking out what was available in Chicago. And I saw a trailer for Richard III, and it seemed totally off the wall bonkers. Like it was, but it's interesting. Like really cinematic, the lighting, the acting. It just seemed like, I don't know anything about this, but I kind of want to know something about it. And it seems like it would be like a good time.
And the first thing is that King Richard is not a male.
Nope, played by a woman.
So the first thing you catch is like, wait, are they saying that that's King Richard? Like, what? I mean, it just really catches you. What are the things that we know from history just about King Richard, which will then tell us about this woman who's playing this?
Katie Sullivan, who plays the lead role, she is an amputee. So it was interesting because they almost gave her multiple things. They also gave her like a gold glove, and so it was almost like that was part of it, almost like she had a mechanical hand. But then they also do incorporate her amputee status. The play opens with her delivering her monologue, and she doesn't have her prosthetic legs on. So she's sort of in the center of the stage, the spotlight's on her, and then she gets into a wheelchair, and then they give her prosthetic legs, and then when she becomes king, she has gold prosthetic legs, and then when she goes into battle, they give her more like sport prosthetic legs. So they really try to incorporate that into the story where it's part of her costume almost, where whatever she's wearing, it's accenting some part of her character or what she's experiencing or going through emotionally.
So tell us about King Richard, other than that. Yes.
All right. Well, so this is all culminating towards the very end of what we call the War of the Roses. So War of the Roses is kind of a 30-year convoluted mess of this dynastic struggle between two branches of the same family. We call it the law of primogeniture, which is basically how you decide who gets to inherit the throne. So technically it's supposed to be the eldest male heir of the eldest, right? But what happened was his heir was a woman who had a son. So technically, because he inherits through the woman, they skipped. Okay, so that line is the York line. And so the family that kind of skipped over that line because they're like, you're descended from a woman, so apparently you don't count. That was the Lancasters, all right? That was Henry, you've heard of the Henry IV, Henry V, okay? But they basically take the throne, and so the Yorks are like, dude, excuse you, but they can't really do much about it because, you know, the Lancasters are very much in power and the Henry IV and V were just phenomenal kings. The Yorks, they're tired of that because they're like, hey, we should have been in line. Who cares if, you know, we descended from, you know, the daughter and not the son. So where does Richard come from? Well, Richard comes from the Yorks because eventually the Yorks are going to go after Henry VI. Remember, he died, murdered, and then they're going to take over. Right? And the guy who takes over is Richard's brother, Edward. And so he's at the beginning of the show. And he's like, you know, this family man, like a true medieval king, doing great. And then he eats some food and dies. And so Richard then is now the protector of the realm. And he is supposed to be, you know, protecting the next heir, which are his nephews. Well, while all that's happening, Margaret,
wait a minute.
The she-wolf,
Margaret
that was the name. They called her she-wolf.
The she-wolf, okay.
Yeah. So Margaret she was the Lancaster. So when Edward takes over, Margaret is dispossessed. She's like all out for revenge. So she has some great monologues in Richard.
And the way they staged it was really cool too, because it's almost like she comes in and she curses them.
Yeah.
And so the way they did the lighting was that there's these white spotlights on her. And then as she's cursing them, she's sort of like splashing them. And they have the lights change from this bright kind of white to red. Ooh. And it's almost like things freeze for a second. And then she keeps going. And it's a really like cinematic moment.
She is powerful. She's one of my favorite women in Shakespeare. Oh, she's cool.
I mean, she-wolf, come on.
Yeah, she's cool. So basically, you know, she curses everybody. But behind the scenes, she's actually working at trying to build support against Richard. So there's a guy that comes along, Henry. And so he has a claim to the throne as well on the Lancaster side. And he's like, all right, I come to bring peace. And I'll marry Elizabeth, who is the one that Richard was after. I'll marry Elizabeth and bring the two houses together because Henry is a Lancaster, Elizabeth is a York. I'll marry them and then if you support me. And so everybody else supports them against Richard because Richard was kind of not the greatest ruler. He was actually, historically speaking, an able administrator. But he was ruthless.
Because there's a power play between Elizabeth and Margaret trying to
get rid of Richard.
Right. So did it make it different that now this is 3 women because of because she's a woman playing it instead of the 2 women after the man?
It was really interesting because, the way that they did it, they didn't really call attention to the fact, they didn't change the gender of Richard. It wasn't like,
it's still a male.
Yeah. She played it as if she was a male. So they used he pronouns. He was still trying to woo women under the understanding that they could have a royal lineage. Yeah. And then even to sort of, I think, maybe build on that, they had a guy play a woman's part, a very small role. That part was the guy playing the woman was a little weird because he came out in like a dress. So it was a little bit, it was a head scratching moment for a second. But in terms of like the main character, it didn't feel like it was a woman playing a guy or trying to be a guy. It was just she was a man. This artistic director at Chicago Shakespeare had worked with Katie Sullivan before in New York.
Yeah.
And she had played a paraplegic there. And so I think he just really liked the way that she delivered the lines and the character and saw something in her portrayal in that play that said, oh, this could translate to Shakespeare. And so I think just given her acting ability and being an amputee and all of these factors sort of built this vision of what he had for Richard, which was really off the wall and harrowing and scary and all these different things. And coming off of Willy Wonka, which is totally different, but just going into it, seeing like how other people deliver those huge monologues and what choices they made with the set and the lighting and just the interactions between the actors and the audience was so different that part of it made it unique and enjoyable, but their interpretation is pretty harrowing. So I don't know that I would recommend this version of it, but I mean, based on what Katie said about Richard III, there's a huge variety of ways that people could do it, and I do think the story or the script is good enough that I would definitely recommend seeing something.
I love that. Yeah. If you were gonna tell our masses of people who watch us, this is what you need to know before you go watch a Shakespeare movie, play, whatever. Is there any advice you can give somebody to have the best experience?
Pay attention. I think like what you said. I think the first time you sort of experience it, you're understanding maybe like 75% of what they're saying.
Okay.
And that's okay.
I would say the best way to get into Shakespeare is just go see a great show and go open-minded. And then I would also say too, just whatever theater company you see it through, remember they are interpreting. So sometimes it's really good. Sometimes how they're interpreting might be, oh, that's interesting. Why did they do that? I wouldn't let that derail necessarily your experience, just so you can experience the story itself.
I hope that if Shakespeare is something that you've always been a little bit afraid of or thought that it bored you, that you'll find out a little bit more about it, because especially if you love history, then I think you would love Shakespeare as well. Until next time, this is just me.
And me.
And me.
Talking to you from the wings.